Hey everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Cassie and this is Lit in Lifestyle. Today what I want to talk about are the books that I've already read so far in 2021. With a goal of 48 books to read this year, I have already read 23, so it's going to be kind of a loaded video. Okay, so one thing that I do want to kind of put a disclaimer on before I really start talking about all of these books that I've read is that I don't really have a specific genre that I follow significantly. I read books based on my emotion at the time. I don't know if that makes sense. For example, I could be reading a book that makes me think a lot or that's really teaching me a lot, and then I want to read something lighter next, so I do that. I could be reading a book that I need to read for my job, so I do that. I teach English as a second language, so I read all of the books for the English department at my school. And so it kind of varies, I guess. So as we're going through these wrap-ups, you're probably going to be like, wow, there's a lot of different types of books. And I think eventually when I make more videos, I'll probably make videos that kind of group books together. Like maybe I'll say, oh, these are my top 5 favorite parenting books, or my top 5 favorite fantasy series, or whatever. So just kind of keep that in mind, I guess, as you're reading that. You're literally going to see everything from like middle grade fantasy to parenting to like Christian literature, to, I don't know, historical books. It's kind of all over the place. And that's just, I guess, a little snapshot into my brain, kind of all over the place. Sorry, not sorry. So first, let's start off in January. I started this year by reading The Tales of Beetle the Bard by J.K. Rowling. This isn't a very big book at all. In fact, for a long time, it was the smallest book I have read. I just had it. I don't know. And I do like Harry Potter, and so I kind of wanted to see what this book was about. It was kind of like an addition to the Harry Potter storyline. I really enjoyed it. It's basically just like children's stories that wizarding parents would tell their kids to kind of teach them lessons, but it uses magic and magical people in the storyline. So it's kind of cool, just another extra part of the wizarding world that has been created, which is fun. The next book I read is called Biased, and I actually read this with my colleagues. So this is a book that we're studying at the school where I work, and it is called Biased. Biased. The subtitle is Uncovering the Hidden Prejudice That Shapes What We See, Think, and Do. So we just called it Bias, but that was the subtitle. So it is all about different biases that we have as people and that are in society. And specifically, though, it shows a lot of studies and kind of statistics revolving around these biases, in particularly with race. And so it was really interesting. I feel like I do want to reread it again at some point in time, but I highlighted a lot of stuff in the book so that I could just like whip out a statistic when I needed it. It was definitely interesting, and I would recommend it if you're interested in learning more about our implicit biases. The next book that I read is this book right here. It's called As Old as Time. I've actually had this book for a while, and I have a couple books in this series, a Twisted Tales series. Why do I have these books? I don't really know. I'm not like a super huge Disney fan. I'm not a Disney fan. I do like Disney, but I'm not someone who like, I don't know, like does everything Disney. After I read Bias, my thoughts were pretty heavy, and I wanted to read something that was a little bit lighter. And so I decided to read this. And I actually really ended up liking it a lot more than I thought. It started out a little bit slower, but it really picked up towards the end. In the last 30%, I was like, flipping through the pages really fast. So it was kind of a lot better than I thought. I actually have a lot of these books, and so I plan on reading more of them, and you'll probably see them in more of my wrap-ups, and maybe I'll even do like a specific video on the series. But it was cool. It was interesting. So the next book that I read, I actually listened to it on audiobook. It's called The Whole Brain Child. I read it, and then right after I read this, Parenting a Child Who Has Intense Emotions. Both of these books I feel like honestly really helped me as a parent. The Whole Brain Child was a really good audio book, for the record. I would recommend it as an audiobook or as just a regular book. But it teaches you a lot about how children's minds work, and when they're dealing with emotions or even traumatic events, how to kind of help them get through those situations and become better human beings in general. So it was really fascinating. I felt like I learned a lot from it. I also really not only learned a lot from this book, but felt supported as well, if that makes sense. I don't know if that would make sense to anybody who doesn't have a kid who has intense emotions, but this I feel like is a little bit of a step up from The Whole Brain Child. The Whole Brain Child I felt like is a pretty general emotion book for any kids. You know, most kids go through temper tantrums in figuring out how to work through those emotions. I felt like The Whole Brain Child was pretty general for all types of situations. This book, I would say, is for children and older children specifically who are still dealing with those intense emotions, and how to kind of work with them, and but also understanding that as a parent, it's a difficult situation. So those two books together, I read back to back, and I really honestly got a lot out of them. I feel like I've become a much better parent since reading them. Like I said, The Whole Brain Child is a little bit more for a general audience, whereas Parenting a Child Who Has Intense Emotions is really for a group of parents who struggle specifically, maybe even with like behavioral disorders, or out of the norm intense emotions, I guess. This same author also has a book for teens who have intense emotions. I have not read that book yet because my children are still young, but this was good, so I would assume that's good. And then the last book that I read in January was Charlotte's Web, and I debated whether even I should put this on here, quite honestly. You know what? I read it. That's pretty much how I feel about it. I have this poster that I get to like scratch off books that I've read, and they're mostly classics, and this was on there. Yeah, I mean, it's a good book. It's a classic. I would consider it a classic. I started to read it out loud to my 6-year-old son. He wasn't really that interested. We did watch the movie before, and quite honestly, the movie is I've seen the movie probably 50 million times. That's an exaggeration, but I've seen the movie a lot. So it's a really good adaptation of the book. So I feel like as I read the book, I was kind of like, I already know this story. I didn't really feel the spark of it as an awesome children's book, I guess I would say, because I knew the story so well already. But nevertheless, I read it, and now I can say that I read it, right? Okay, so for the month of February, I started it off with Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. I have to admit, like, the plot is very subpar, to say the least. It is written as a screenplay. I would see it in theater. I would probably really like that. I did not like the plot. It just is definitely not as in-depth as the stories, which makes sense. J.K. Rowling, she didn't even write it, but I did still find it fascinating to see like a side of Harry Potter, Ron, and Hermione as adults, and kind of like adding on to their character a little bit. It does take place significantly farther into the future. They have children, and I'm glad that I read it, but I guess I just read it for what it was. like a sequel that wasn't even really written by the author. So yeah. The next book that I read after Harry Potter and the Cursed Child was I Am Malala, the girl who stood up for education and was shot by the Taliban. I actually listened to this Audible book, and I enjoyed it. I didn't think I wasn't going to enjoy it. I've had it for a long time and just have never listened to it. So I did feel like the first part was a little bit slow. It was talking about the history of kind of the politics, but it got, really. I mean, it's obviously a true story. It's very interesting, and as a teacher and a woman, I felt like it would be basically an autobiography that I'd be interested in, and I was right. I think that it's an important book for people to read because it's important to understand even how America, the United States, looks towards the Middle East, and especially like around the years of 9/11 and after. I did get a lot out of it at that point in time because I was pretty young at that during that era, and so to see it through her eyes was really fascinating to me. And then I read The Four Agreements by Miguel Ruiz, and I just I didn't really like that book. Honestly, I feel bad saying that. I know a lot of people like it, but it just was not my cup of tea. It was not my style of personal development, I guess. It was just like a lot of words for very little advice. That's kind of how I felt. And I was glad to be done with it. The next book I read was Rusha and the Song of Death. I actually have made a video about this series. This is the second book in the series. And so if you are interested in learning about this series, I will put the link up in the cards. Really good series, though. I would recommend. And then I read a classic, which surprisingly I've never read before, is 1984. I was supposed to read this book in high school, and I never did. Sorry. And I didn't like it as much as I thought I was going to like it. I liked it, but especially the ending, I was just kind of like, it made me feel kind of like I wasn't smart enough to understand the book. I don't know if that makes sense, but at the end, I just was like, what even really happened? I don't even really know. But it was good, and I do think it's really a timeless piece, and it really makes you think about how George Orwell thought the world was going to be like this in 1984, and how now it's 2021, and is the world getting to be like this? And it is very thought-provoking. I would recommend it if you have never read it, but I had to read it along with Fahrenheit 451 one summer, and I only read Fahrenheit 451, and Fahrenheit 451 is one of my all-time favorite books, so that book will always take the cake over this one, personally. But it was good. So the next book that I read was kind of a random book that I got as a Kindle book deal, and it was called Arias Traveling Bookshop. It was a romance, which I don't typically read a lot of romance, but I don't mind it. And I got it because the cover was really cute, the picture. And she lives in a little van that she drives around. She has a nomadic lifestyle and sells books. And so I thought that was really cool. And I actually gravitated more towards that aspect of the book as opposed to the actual romance when I initially bought it. What I did like about the book, though, was it really made me think about certain things. For example, her husband had died a few years prior, which is all in the synopsis, but that's not something that I'm very familiar with. I'm not very familiar with the feeling of grief, and specifically the grief of a spouse. And so I thought it was very interesting to read from that perspective, and it made me think I should read from different perspectives more often, which probably sounds stupid, but when you're talking about love stories, I feel like you always tend to gravitate toward what you're used to in a love story that would be interesting to you as like a personal person. But I feel like that sounds dumb, but whatever. So I really decided that I should try to look at other things outside of my typical romance if I'm going to be reading romances here and there. I liked it. It was kind of a short read. There was a lot of buildup, like the whole time I was like, okay, I'm just like ready for them to like each other now. And then the actual time that they were like together wasn't very long. So I was a little bit bummed about that. I wish there was a little more romance, I guess, in the book. But it was still good. It was cute. There is also another book that goes before it, technically, called Rosie's something. Rosie is a character in Aria's Traveling Bookshop. You don't have to read Rosie's story before, but you can. It does happen before Aria's. I didn't, and I thought Aria's story was fine without it. So it is an option, though. The second to last book that I read in February is called The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. And this is an author that I was specifically teaching about in my Spanish class. And I have always really wanted to read this book and just haven't. I really enjoyed it. It is a poetry book, a book of poems that follow a storyline. It was really good. I was highlighting it and bookmarking different pages that I wanted to use in my class or that I just thought were really well written. I really enjoyed it for a bunch of different reasons. I'm very eager to read more of Elizabeth Acevedo's books, and I would definitely recommend reading her poetry or even just like looking her up on YouTube. She's pretty cool. And then the last book that I read for the month of February is called The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. And I had really mixed feelings about this book. If you're really interested in seeing my full thoughts, you can read my review of it on Goodreads. But I do feel like it has, I don't even really know how to say it, but it basically has extreme pros and cons, is what I said. It does bring up racial issues between white Americans and Native Americans, which I think is a really important issue that isn't really shown a lot in literature, specifically for young people. All right, and lastly, the month of March. Okay, so I did read some really great books in the month of March. The first one that I read is Rusha and the Tree of Wishes, which, like Rusha and the Song of Death I talk about in that first video, I'm really excited for the fourth book of that series to come out, which is coming out at the beginning of April. It's definitely a fun series. The next book that I read was so good, and it is Stamped by Jason Reynolds and Ibram X. Kendi. And this I just found so fascinating. This is written for like students basically. And Ibram X. Kendi has written Stamped from the Beginning, which is kind of like a history book for adults, which I'm definitely going to read. But I don't know. I got this book honestly on a Kindle deal of the day. I check the Kindle deals of the day every day, and I was like, yeah, I'm really trying to read about racism and anti-racism and educating myself. And so I got it for, I don't know, like $1.99 or something. Maybe it was one of those that are like $3.99 or something like that. But and it sat there in my Kindle library for a while, and I just started to read it, and wow, I got so much out of this book, and it is definitely a book that I will reread probably 5 more times. I cannot recommend this book enough, quite honestly, and I'm really excited to read more of Jason Reynolds' work. I have heard a lot about him on BookTube, and I even have some of his other books. But after reading this, it was so easy to read, and I felt like finally I was reading something that was like true, I guess, is how I felt. It's basically like a history book. It says this is not a history book, but it pretty much is. But the way that it's written is almost conversationally, and you learn a lot about history that is a little bit different from the history that we typically learn while we're growing up in the United States. And it really kind of focuses on race and where did people stand back in the day. Like, we have this vision of people from our history books as we've been growing up, but this is kind of like a different, like looking at those people through a different lens, and I just found it so fascinating. I put it into my top favorite books shelf on Goodreads. I plan on reading Stamped from the beginning, and I even pre-ordered, they have a Stamped for Kids. I pre-ordered that, which comes out, I think, in May. I don't know if it's a chapter book like this or if it's a picture book. I'm not sure yet, but I already pre-ordered that. So I'm really excited for that to come out. But it was really good, really good. Okay, and then another book that I read, another Kindle Deal of the Day book that I got was called Evidence of the Affair by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And this was a short story. It took me like an hour maybe to read. But I got it because I've seen a lot of people talk about Taylor Jenkins Reid on BookTube. And so I was really interested in her reading and seeing kind of like if I liked it and if I wanted to get more of her books and try them out. I really liked the writing and I really liked the story. I was not satisfied with the ending, which I'm not going to talk about, but yeah, I mean, it's basically like there's this woman who finds out her husband's having an affair, and she contacts the other woman's husband, and it's just this letter correspondence between both of them as they kind of lean on each other while they're getting through the fact that their spouses are having an affair together, which sounds weird, but it was really good. And I was just really surprised how in such short a time, it's the shortest book I've read this year so far. I think it's under 90 pages. I think it's like 87 or something like that. In such short a time though, I was like invested in the characters and wanted them to do well. The characterization is really great. And I felt for them, which is also kind of why I wasn't satisfied with the ending, but I really enjoyed reading Evidence of the Affair. I thought that it was a really great break for me. Sometimes you read a book that is really thought-provoking or very dense, and you kind of need something that's a little bit lighter in order to, kind of calm your brain down, I guess, or at least that's how I am. And so that's what I did with that story, and it worked really well. I really enjoyed it. The last book that I have read for this like first quarter of the year is Left Behind by Tim LaHaye and Jerry B. Jenkins. So I started reading this series because this is my mom's favorite series, and she got me the full set on Kindle. And so this is actually her copy of the book, but she really loved this series as I was growing up and has always recommended it. And so I decided to start to read it. And it was very fascinating. I had to stop a couple of times because it did give me some anxiety, but I really liked it. There are 12 books in the series, and this is the first one. So I'm really anxious to read the rest of the series, but I know that I'll kind of have to chop it up because it is a lot to think about. Basically, this is a Christian novel series that starts off with the rapture. So the very first chapter, the rapture takes place in this book, and it's kind of like what happens after that. It's not everybody's cup of tea. Not everybody believes in the rapture, but it was, I enjoyed it. And I also really enjoyed being able to like talk to my mom about it because I like to talk about books, and this was, like I said, her favorite series. So it was cool as I was going through it. I was able to be like, oh my gosh, this just happened. And so I really enjoyed connecting with her on the series as well. So the last thing that I really want to talk about is actually a series that I've been reading throughout the first 3 months of the year, and it's a comic book series. I don't generally read comic book series or even really graphic novels. I'm not against them. I just don't typically read them. And this series, however, though, is a series that I really love that started on TV, and I just kind of came across these comic books and I didn't realize certain things about them. And so anyway, that is the Avatar: The Last Airbender comic book series. So I'm not going to talk a ton about these because I do want to, when I'm pretty much done with the series, but I do want to make their an own separate video for them. But I have read the first 5 storylines. So each storyline has 3 parts in it, which is why I kind of said it weird. But this is an omnibus of the first storyline. This is called The Promise. So this is actually the first 3 parts in the series. One thing I do want to say is that it starts exactly where the TV series ends off. So that's really all I'm going to say. But in this video, I will eventually, within the next week or so, probably be filming another video that talks specifically about these comic books. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to mention that I have also been reading them as well. They are in my Goodreads. I really struggled with like adding them to my Goodreads because I was thinking, oh, should they be counted towards my goal of 48 books? But I have only been adding them as the omnibus. I don't even know if that's how you say it. I'm really not a comic book reader, but so basically I'm not adding like part 1 and part 2 and part 3. I'm adding them all together because you can purchase them that way now. But yeah, I am enjoying them. And so I just kind of wanted to say, this is also something that I've been reading. They're good breaks. Sometimes if I just want to read something quick, I can read a part or 2 pretty easily. And so, yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm really looking forward to the month of April and the books that I want to read. And there I do plan on doing a TBR or a to be read video for the month of April. So be on the lookout for that. And that's about it. So if you guys have any questions about any of the books that I've read, or you want to recommend some books, please let me know in the comments below. If you have read any of these books and you want to share your thoughts, I'd really love to know them as well. And go ahead and find me on Goodreads. It's linked in the description box below so that you could see more of my thoughts on these specific books and other books that I've read in the past that obviously I haven't made videos about because I'm just now starting this booktube thing. And that's about it. So see you guys in a couple days.